welcome everybody. I'm really excited to start our day with a distinguished keynote speaker, and we're so glad to have Senator Charles Perry joining us. Familiar to most of you, but just a brief introduction. You know, he was elected to represent Senate District 28 back in 2014 after 2 terms in the Texas House. He was recently reappointed to chair the Committee on Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs for this upcoming or now current legislative session. He serves also as the vice chair for the Health and Human Services Committee and sits on the committees for Finance, Redistricting, Transportation, and Education. And if that weren't enough to keep him busy, he also co-chairs the SWIFT Advisory Committee and has been appointed by Governor Abbott to serve on the Southwestern States Water Commission and the Western States Water Council. Thank you so much and welcome, Senator Perry. You know, with the start of the 87th legislative session, we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And we're really interested to hear your thoughts on this session and what it means for the groundwater community. So we're going to turn our cameras off, let you deliver your remarks, and then I'll keep an eye on questions as they come in from our audience, and I'll turn my camera back on at the end, time permitting, and verbalize those questions for you if that's all right.
That's great. I appreciate it, Leah. Thank you guys for inviting me to do this again. It's always a joy to get in front of folks that have a interest in the only thing that matters, and that's water. And you guys do a good job of advocating for the water issues that we face in Texas, and it's a consistent and solid voice, and I always welcome your input. Session, I'm just going to talk a little bit about general session and what you can expect and how that looks and what it might work like. First of all, that we do anticipate and expect and desire to have public testimony in person. We don't figure there's a really good way of actually being able to have public testimony virtually. That's different than if you're a resource witness or just wanting to contribute from an invited perspective, and those people can still do virtual. But as far as public testimony goes, you will be probably required to be in person during a hearing process. On the Senate side, it's pretty much unanimous as of yesterday that all of the chairmen of the committees are going to require testing from those people that show up in our hearings. So if you're coming to testify on a bill or want to be part of an audience on a bill, just to keep our staff and members safe so that we can get our work done through the next 140 days, it's prudent to have people tested. And if you have it, then obviously you can't come in and you'll be quarantined, asked to leave the building and not spread. But so public testimony is available, and we will require all people participating in that level to have been tested. I currently test every day when I go to the Senate floor, and my staff, if they're coming to a floor or in a hearing process or something like that, they're also being tested daily. So we're going to be able to catch something pretty quick before it spreads. The testing can be provided at the North entrance for free. So those that wanting to participate won't have to be out any money. It takes 15 minutes. It's pretty non-invasive test. For those that haven't had it, it's the Abbott test. It's 15 minutes. It's a shallow nose swab and not very intrusive at all. Mask in the building will be highly encouraged. I think mask on the Senate side will pretty much be required. General session, we've got 2 or 3 things we have to do. We have to do the budget, and we have to do redistricting. It's a 10-year cycle. I came in 2011. We had a drought, we had a budget deficit, and we had redistricting. Fast forward to 2021, we have a drought, we have redistricting, and we have a budget deficit. So I don't know if we're on a 10-year cycle or not, but it's not a good cycle to be on. So we're going to be doing our redistricting hearings. We've had a week of redistricting hearings so far, started Monday. We are hearing around the state as required by the Voting Rights Act to have those hearings for around state for public input. We're doing those virtually. Senators are socially distanced on the Senate floor itself. It's worked pretty well. Participation in the communities, we're trying to get a better job to get the word out to actually go to a portal and log in. But we anticipate doing redistricting through the end of next week. That will encompass the bulk of the required community hearings that we would need to have before finance starts. Finance is expected to start on February the 8th. That'll be 5-day weeks, probably for 4 weeks until we get the budget nailed down and out. So it'll be a busy week for members that are on redistricting and finance. So that would be me. Actual committees are projected to start probably that first to second week of March. So you can start seeing probably groundwater hearings somewhere in probably the second week, if not the first week of March. And that's when all the other hearings will start up in earnest. So that's kind of what the hearing schedules look like. The budgets have been compared to the House. They're extremely close, very, very small differences between the two, which is a good starting point. Not a lot of items to reconcile. The budget itself is 251 billion, which is what we had last year, our last session to work from. I have been in the session in 2011. That was a real problem. That was real cash. We did not have it. We did not have a hope of a federal dollar coming to save the day. That had already happened prior to 2011 and 9. This session coming into 21 has looked a whole lot better. Looks different because we have some other tools in the toolbox that we didn't have in 11. So the budget itself should come out fairly non-eventful and hopefully as close to the 251 that we had last session. 251 is not currently there as far as projections go, but with the momentum and the COVID being arrested at the level it is and where we're going, I think that we'll be okay. The current administration obviously is not Texas friendly when it comes to fossil fuels industries, and some of the things in the short term effect of that is probably that oil prices will go up because supply will be actually affected. So it's going to be a short term gain, I think, in the oil and gas industry as supply channels are restricted or regulated, and we'll just see where that goes. But long term, I think that we need to be responsible, acknowledge that if it goes a whole lot longer than the 2 to 4 year window and they do get some footholds into effectively eliminating fossil fuels out, then Texas has to start talking about what does that mean, what does that look like. I expect it to be a contentious time with Texas and the current administration. We've been there before. This one's a little bit different. Just a little bit different tenor and tenure, I think, temperament coming through. So we'll have to work around that the best we can. As far as bigger bills in session, outside of the budget and redistricting, which are required, and by the way, on the redistricting, we won't have our data as early as March 6th is the earliest date, but probably more likely July before we'll actually have final census numbers. That will push redistricting probably into as late as October, November, which will make it a very miserable year for members from a personal perspective. Those that have jobs and families and communities at home, you'll effectively be out of those environments for almost 10, 12 months this year. So it's not going to be a good session in that regard. I think that we can probably expect redistricting to pick up 2 congressional seats. The federal level, that's pretty much a guarantee from what we're projecting, possibly picking up a 3rd congressional seat. Our rural communities, as always, will be under the microscope, just depending on where the numbers lie and what the county makeups have to be to make those numbers work. It's strictly math. So that's kind of the session in a nutshell. I think my other initiatives obviously are water. There's several water initiatives. And then rural broadband. For the first time in about 6 to 8 years, I've been involved in those conversations, and that we do actually have federal dollars coming to the state to implement rural broadband. We've had some federal dollars in the past, and we were not very good stewards of it. We had fiber on top of fiber, running some vendors out of the communities that have been there for years. It was not very coordinated or collaborated. Me and 2 other senators have partnered up to write a bill that will give a clear path to what we need to do to get it with those federal dollars to get the rural broadband initiative met. On water, I've said it for sessions, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, that water supply is really what we need to be talking about. We do want to make sure we're good conservation and good stewards of what we have. We want to make sure that our objectives of a statewide water plan are going to be met. At the same time, we need to consistently and continually be looking for additional water resources. And that's what you'll see this focus in our water hearing on as far as my bill pattern goes, or my bill package. It'll be centered around a lot of water supply discussions, as well as I do have Senate Bill 152. It's an omnibus groundwater bill. From what we can tell, minimum pushback on most of the provisions in it. We're working with stakeholders to address a few of the concerns that Senate Bill 152 did create, but specifically it allows a petition change where the landowner can go through a public hearing process similar to some other state agencies. Notifications, where we're still working with a substitute language to effectively address a couple of the stakeholders that have raised an issue. If you're already if you already have an effective notification system, obviously you don't need to duplicate or be having to create another one. We're going to try to exempt those. Those that don't, hopefully we'll see their participation come on voluntarily to where they can be better at providing information to the people they serve. DFC, I think, is the challenge, the fix, where you can go and revert back to the existing DFC until the DFC challenge is completed. I think that one makes a lot of sense, and most of the groundwater people think that that was something they needed. I have pre-pitched, or we have been working on the interim for over all this interim, but actually conversation started at the end of last session regarding a produced water consortium. I don't want to use the word study. We want a bona fide effort of stakeholders to come together, specifically in the area of the Permian Basin, where we have an abundance of produced water from oil and gas activity, that the estimates can go back to high as 33 million acre feet since 2009 that we pulled out of the ground. About half of that has been used by the industry for reuse, which is good stewards of that, but we want to make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned as far as the potential water supply there. And what the consortium will do is bring those stakeholders together, address the technologies that exist. Can we actually bring them together in a scalable fashion and actually have a process which they can become a potable source that can be reused for municipal and other purposes? So we have a lot of those conversations over the years, and they usually start and stop with it costs too much or the technology doesn't exist. Truth of the matter is nobody's ever really done the work to determine whether that's true or not. So it'll be housed at Texas Tech. We have a lot of water experts already there, but it will really will be focused on the industry people that are currently in that wheelhouse that actually do have produced water and are actually being able to clean it up to certain levels for reuse, as well as the regulatory framework that needed to be changed to have those conversations in earnest so that we can get past some of the regulatory environments. We did that. We got some EPA regulations where we transferred that to Texas. Streamline permitting for commercial water recycling. That's Rule 8 in the oil and gas industry. That's something else that we're currently working on. Direct potable reuse. TCEQ currently has a really good process in which communities that have the interest for potable reuse. Unfortunately, those rules are kind of on an individual city by city basis at this point. We've asked TCEQ to review that and see if they can't come up with a uniform standard that when developments are being made that they can use to give out to any or every community that's looking at purple pipe. So that's kind of the water agenda in a nutshell. I do value your role. I think that private property rights are premier and a center cornerstone of our Republic Constitution. I think you guys understand that. I sometimes believe that y'all don't know how important that is as a role for being a protector of those very much private landowners and rights by actually trying to help manage the resource of water. As we see WOTUS from the feds come back in conversations on surface levels, as well as other states around the union, I guess confiscating the private landowner rights at some level with a federal probably backing of it, either directly or indirectly, y'all's role becomes more and more important. I would encourage you to make that perspective known more than you probably do already. And look forward to working with you. With that, I'll take a few questions. I know that's a little longer than probably you needed, but that's pretty, we have some other work on some dams and river authorities, but I just look forward to working with you guys. Stay in touch with Catherine and Leah and those groups that are in your same industry groups, but feel free to have a few questions.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Senator Perry. So yes, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll see them and be able to read them out. I do have a couple that have come in already. One question was that there was a bill that's been filed to have the legislature meet every year rather than every other year. What are your thoughts on that?
Generally speaking, philosophically, the less we're down here, the more mischief we can create, and y'all are better served by that. Truthfully, I think we do a very good job as a state of being very efficient to get the big items done and a lot of other stuff too. I am not a fan of extending our career opportunity as being a state legislature. I am not a fan of making it a career opportunity. So I'd be very hesitant. I think if we were going to have the conversation in earnest, maybe you would do a situation where you'd focus on budget for the 1 year and come back the next year and do the non-budget items, because we are a big state. But we run very well. We're a model that everybody looks to from a legislative perspective of how effective we are and the principles that we do and the continued environment that we create. We have 196 businesses talking to the governor's office that are on a list wanting to get to Texas as fast as they can. So I would hate to change what's working, so every 2 years seem to be working real well. But when we're down here too long or more often, we create more heartache, I think, than good. So we have to stay kind of focused on 140 days. So I'm not a fan of it.
Thank you for that. There's another question that came in, and maybe you're not familiar with this, but there's been a case at the Supreme Court before a special master of the U.S. Supreme Court that's talking about aquifers shared between two states. And there's a suggestion that the Supreme Court would maybe rule that there would be a need to equitably apportion the water in that aquifer between two states. So I guess the question is kind of, what are your thoughts, if you have any, on federal involvement in groundwater?
Specific to that, I'm not aware of the fact pattern, so I can't address specifically what that case is addressing. I can understand, because it's kind of our water rights in Texas, right? The fungible nature of water moves between landowners. So it's kind of hypocritical to say that that doesn't have some kind of a conversation piece. But what scares me to death is to have a federal, and it's their jurisdiction if it's, between two states, unfortunately. But I am very concerned about any federal input into people's livelihood when it comes to water. And so I'll get with Catherine and get up to speed on where that came from and the origin and what it's about. The Ogallala goes up to 9 states. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. We seem to have managed pretty well without having a federal law that requires us to do what's common sense, and the water takes care of itself. So tread lightly, don't like it. Wouldn't want it, but I can understand that there's probably legal precedence to have that conversation. But I will pursue that, get with Catherine on what that is about, because now I'm interested. But it's never a good day when a higher geopolitical position further removed from your local and state gets involved in the conversations.
Yeah, no, I think it would represent a really big change in how things have been done. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Got another question, and again, it's a specific case. You may not be particularly familiar with it, but there's a case that's been filed against a GCD where a taking has been claimed based solely on the district seeking to enforce its rules. And I think districts are concerned, because that would really, really chill their comfort level in enforcing their rules. Curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I would say it this way. I think districts appropriately are always worried about a takings claim, correct? And so it doesn't matter if it's administrative or if it's other rules. It doesn't matter what it is. At the end of the day, it's a private property right that's been set in court. So as GCDs have these challenges, if they can point to science and point to rational, reasonable perspective that's been equitably distributed throughout their member, if you're not picking winners and losers for whatever reason, inadvertently or inadvertently, you're going to be fine. But I'm not surprised, and I think it's going to be more and more as these urban centers look outward to try to get more water and do things. But I don't think that you should be shocked as an industry group that you get challenged on a takings claim, whether it's administrative or other rules that created the environment to have the claims checking challenge. it just goes back to, are you consistent? Do you have a science? And if you do, I think you'll prevail, and you should, right? If it's what we've been talking about for my tenure in the Senate. Can you defend what you are with something that a non-biased, a very objective third-party observer would look like and go, well, that makes sense. I don't think there was a wrong here by application. So I just keep encouraging you guys. The more uniform you can make it with the nuances of different water sources and groundwaters that you deal with, the more easily you'll be successful in a challenge.
Thank you for that. So another question, kind of switching gears, you were talking about produced water and setting up a Permian Basin consortium. Question was raised about that. Now, is that going to, is that something that will have regulatory components changing to it, or is it more of like a pilot project for use?
So we have to know if it's doable, and two or three things determine what's doable. One, is there enough surplus? Yes, there is. Two, is there actually a scalability to it? Can we make it big enough to impact a region and economically? That comes into play. So we can address those. So the consortium is basically to address all of the unknowns and take the knowns and see if it works. Not to implement anything, but I would expect to have a pilot project that could do it. And that would be the goal, that can put a lot of these questions to bed and set the issue of produced water either as a legitimate possible water supply in the future or not, and quit dealing with it. But we have to explore it. That's too much water as a potential supply. As far as regulatory goes, and we've already had a big Tribune article, and the EPAs and all the environmentalists came out with pitchforks. And my question, I guess, is do you really think that as a state we would allow, and we already have regulatory on clean water, right? TCEQ does a good job of making our water supply secure. Do you think we would ever envision a piece of legislation being implemented that would put nasty water back into a clean water supply? So it's just the things you consistently hear. I think some of it's self-preservation at its worst. They've got to have an existence, so this is their new deal. But we're not going to turn loose of a nasty water product into a water supply, obviously. But what we don't know is, can we clean it up to where it's a clean water supply and go forward? Because it's too big of a supply opportunity to ignore, specifically in West Texas. An average 1 million gallons a day is a small municipal use in my area. If you can convert that and put it back into the distribution system as it currently exists, you've just solved a whole lot of cities' concerns about future water supply in West Texas.
Another question that came in on the produced water topic was whether or not you think that it would be appropriate to make more efforts to incentivize the oil and gas industry to do more reuse internally before going, do we need to do more there as well?
So the incentives already exist, and 50% of the frac water, I believe, is based on reuse now. The large producer groups have figured out a way to do it fairly economically and make economic sense. So the incentive is, it's expensive to buy fresh water. It's expensive to haul water in. The industry groups figured that out pretty quick when we're at peak productions and said, we got to do something different. And the incentive was, they determined internally they can clean it up for reuse a lot cheaper than they can haul it in. That's a good benefit to the state. They don't have a lot of weight being hauled over the roads to destroy roads to do it. So I think the incentive internally is already there. The question becomes, if it can be a new water supply and we can justify the economics of it, can we establish an economic cost recovery system where the industry groups can actually see positive cash flow from a third-party purchaser of it? So, and that's part of the consortium's job, is to figure out the economics. I don't have a predetermined plan, but I will tell you, if you can find a way to clean it up to a level where you put it into an aquifer system and there's 1 million meters pulling from the aquifer system that just got a new water supply effectively in perpetuity, as long as there's an oil and gas production industry, they may be willing to share in that. But those are the conversations that's never been had. So we want to make sure that, obviously, the industry doesn't want to do it for free. The incentive is already there to them internally because they can't afford to bring in produced water. Plus the politics, right? The public communication problem of the PR campaign against using fresh water, as well as injecting into saltwater wells is there and it's real, and you're going to deal with that. So this solves a lot of ills. But I think the incentive internally has been there for years. They figured it out that they can do it cheaper than bringing it in.
Great. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and I have one here that's asking about whether or not you're planning to have any more groundwater legislation other than 152. And then it sounds like you mentioned the TWCA consensus legislation on the DFCs might be something. Do you think there'll be anything else?
Yeah, we're going to probably include that into 152 since it's kind of an omnibus bill that fits that. And really, generally speaking, exception of a couple of stakeholder groups, most of them have been pretty open to the transparency that 152 brings to the table. I don't have any specific bills today. I have other members, new members. I have 3 new committee members, I think, on the hearing. And I'm sure they'll bring a lot of water legislation that may or may not be needed to be heard, but it be from perspectives of probably not understanding a lot of the water statutes. You know, it's not the sexiest topic, and members don't usually migrate to it, and they get stuck on the committee. They get a lot of requests to file bills.
What are you talking about? You're talking to a lot of water geeks here.
Yeah. So truthfully, I expect a lot of new member bills that probably won't move a lot unless they're just really good and valid bills that their districts need that can justify all the things I treasure. You know, it's the private property issue first, and from there we work down. And not to change our water laws to where they're irreparable or unforeseen consequences can happen without, you know, hopefully we try to identify those. So I expect other members to have some water bills that will probably give y'all concerns. And we'll be mindful of those and make sure you keep us in the loop. And hopefully they'll have some water bills that can actually move for their area that need it, that don't upset the apple cart. But I don't personally have any more outside of the big ones that are there, water supply being the main one. For me, the consortium is a big deal. I think that if we can get 152 over the finish line, I think y'all's industry group is more transparent and works. And I think that generally speaking, it's a good bill for y'all as an industry to adopt in the sense that it just shuts down some of the rhetoric that goes around out there that y'all need to be aware of. You know, you need to be upfront and transparent as you can. And I know y'all try, and I think that gets you there.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us. We always appreciate hearing your perspectives and look forward to working with you during the upcoming session here.
I appreciate you guys. Y'all have a great conference. I look forward to the day we can do it again in person. This
absolutely.
Is not
You'll be first to be invited.
All right. Y'all have a good week. Thanks.